you ever trusted someone only to discover they were wearing a mask the entire time? One of the most powerful and life-changing skills you can ever develop is the ability to discern character not just on the surface, but deep beneath the layers people show to the world. And no, I'm not talking about figuring out whether you like someone. That's just preference. I'm talking about a kind of perception that goes beyond charm or charisma, skill rooted in quiet observation and a real understanding of human nature. Because here's the hard truth. There are people walking among us who do not want what's best for you. That may sound uncomfortable. It may even sound paranoid, but it's reality. Some people aren't simply lost or confused, they feed on destruction. They lie, they deceive, and they manipulate, because that's how they operate. It's who they've chosen to become. And if you're not paying attention, if you miss the subtle signs, they'll slip into your life. They'll show up as friends, mentors, even lovers. But behind the mask, they're barriers, not bridges. They won't help you grow, they'll hold you back, drag you down, and pull you away from the person you were created to become. Now, maybe you're thinking, but I choose to believe in the goodness of people. And sure, that sounds noble. Believing the best about others feels like the kind thing to do. But there's a fine line between optimism and blindness, and when you assume the best in someone without examining their behavior, you step over that line. And blindness? It's dangerous. It opens the door to traps you never saw coming. You get tricked, pulled into toxic connections, and before you realize it, you're drained, discouraged, and in some case completely broken. So, what's the antidote? How do you wake up? How do you build the kind of awareness that keeps you from being deceived? The very first step is deceptively simple. Watch. Watch not just what people say, but what they do. That's where the truth always hides. Anyone can say the right thing. Words are easy. Flattery is cheap. And those with the worst intentions? They're often the most gifted with their words. They'll tell you exactly what you want to hear. They'll wrap their manipulation in charm and call it love, loyalty, or wisdom. But if you watch closely, if you stop listening and start observing, you'll begin to notice something strange. Small cracks in their story. Moments where their actions don't quite match their words. They say one thing, but do another. And that right there, inconsistency, is one of the clearest signs you're dealing with someone dangerous. They might promise loyalty, but turn their back the moment it serves them. They might speak of virtue, but live in quiet deception. They might claim to support you, but subtly work against you when you're not looking. And once you learn to spot these inconsistencies, once your eyes adjust to this deeper kind of vision, you'll never unsee it. Once you begin to notice the cracks between what someone says and what they actually do, there's no turning back. A new clarity sets in, and that's exactly what manipulators fear the most. Here's the trick. They don't want you to notice the inconsistency. In fact, they're counting on you not noticing. They rely on your distraction, your optimism, your assumption that people always mean well. They bet you're not paying close enough attention to see the pattern. But if you train yourself, if you learn to watch, rather than just listen, those patterns will start to reveal themselves. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. There's another powerful clue you should never ignore. How someone treats people who can do nothing for them. This is one of the purest tests of character. Because let's be honest, anyone can be kind when there's something to gain. Anyone can play generous when it boosts their image or secures a favor. But if you truly want to see a person's heart, watch how they treat those beneath them in status. How do they speak to the waitress taking their order? How do they treat the janitor who cleans their office? How do they behave when there's no potential reward for their kindness? A person who is cruel to the powerless is showing you something deeply disturbing about their soul. That kind of cruelty doesn't stay contained. It seeps slowly, quietly into every relationship, every space they enter. And if you get too close, you will become their next target. Now, let's talk about deception. Because manipulation and deceit aren't just occasional tools for toxic people, they are their primary weapons. This is how they maintain control. This is how they get what they want without ever revealing their true intentions. But if you watch closely, if you stop listening and start observing, you'll begin to notice something strange. Small cracks in their story. Moments where their actions don't quite match their words. They say one thing, but do another. And that right there, inconsistency, is one of the clearest signs you're dealing with someone dangerous. They might promise loyalty, but turn their back the moment it serves them. They might speak of virtue, but live in quiet deception. They might claim to support you, but subtly work against you when you're not looking. And once you learn to spot these inconsistencies, once your eyes adjust to this deeper kind of vision, you'll never unsee it. Once you begin to notice the cracks between what someone says and what they actually do, there's no turning back. A new clarity sets in, and that's exactly what manipulators fear the most. Here's the trick. They don't want you to notice the inconsistency. In fact, they're counting on you not noticing. They rely on your distraction, your optimism, your assumption that people always mean well. They bet you're not paying close enough attention to see the pattern. But if you train yourself, if you learn to watch, rather than just listen, those patterns will start to reveal themselves. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. There's another powerful clue you should never ignore. How someone treats people who can do nothing for them. This is one of the purest tests of character. Because let's be honest, anyone can be kind when there's something to gain. Anyone can play generous when it boosts their image or secures a favor. But if you truly want to see a person's heart, watch how they treat those beneath them in status. How do they speak to the waitress taking their order? How do they treat the janitor who cleans their office? How do they behave when there's no potential reward for their kindness? A person who is cruel to the powerless is showing you something deeply disturbing about their soul. That kind of cruelty doesn't stay contained. It seeps slowly, quietly into every relationship, every space they enter. And if you get too close, you will become their next target. Now, let's talk about deception. Because manipulation and deceit aren't just occasional tools for toxic people, they are their primary weapons. This is how they maintain control. This is how they get what they want without ever revealing their true intentions. Because when you're dealing with someone honest and emotionally healthy, things are simple. Conversations feel clear. You don't have to decode mixed signals or walk on eggshells. But with a manipulator, confusion is the constant backdrop. One moment they're warm and affectionate, then suddenly cold and distant. One moment they're praising you, then criticizing you in ways that cut deep. And you begin to wonder, is it me? Am I being too sensitive? Number, you're not. That confusion isn't accidental, it's intentional. It's a tactic to keep you unstable, off balance, and easier to control. If you're in a relationship, personal, professional, or otherwise, where you're constantly second-guessing reality, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a red flag. The third step? Pay close attention to how someone responds when they're confronted with the truth. This is a crucial test of character. A decent, self-aware person can admit when they're wrong. They may not like it, but they'll take responsibility. They'll apologize. They'll try to make it right. But a manipulator? They will never own their faults. Instead, they'll dodge. They'll deflect. They'll flip the script so fast, suddenly you're the one to blame. You raise a valid concern and, instead of resolving it, they explode in anger, guilt trip you, or twist it around to make you feel ashamed for even bringing it up. That's not healthy disagreement. That's not conflict resolution. That's emotional manipulation, pure and simple. So, what do you do when you start recognizing these patterns? The answer isn't easy, but it is clear. You create distance. You set boundaries. You stop engaging in battles with people who have no interest in the truth. Because here's the reality. You cannot win an argument with someone who doesn't care about being honest. They're not looking for clarity. They're looking for control. And yet, so many fall into this trap. If I just love them enough, if I explain myself better, if I give them one more chance, maybe they'll finally see the light. But no, they won't. Because here's the reality. People don't change unless they want to. And bad people, the truly deceitful, manipulative, toxic ones, don't want to change. Why would they? Their strategies work. They get what they want. They thrive in the chaos they create. They don't want peace. They want control. And the moment you start thinking it's your job to fix them, you lose control over your own life. Let me make it clear. Your job is not to heal them. Your job is to protect yourself, to stay awake, to be aware, to build a life that's surrounded by people who nourish your spirit, not drain it dry. Because your future, your peace, your growth, your happiness depends on the company you keep. And if you allow toxic people into your inner circle, if you let them set up camp in your mind and heart, you will pay the price. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, piece by piece. So be vigilant, be discerning, and above all, never ignore what your gut is telling you. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone's energy weighs you down, trust that. Don't wait for proof when your soul is already sending you signals. And now let's talk about one of the most telling signs that you're dealing with someone truly destructive. Their refusal to take responsibility for anything. Not just once or twice. Not just over the little things. We're talking about their entire approach to life. It's like looking at someone who simply refuses to confront reality. Every mistake, someone else's fault. Every failure, blamed on another person. Every consequence, dodged with excuses. And if you don't learn to spot this trait early on, you might spend years tangled up in the psychological web of someone who will never admit they're wrong. And there is nothing more emotionally draining than carrying someone else's baggage while they deny it even exists. What's worse? These people often surround themselves with enablers. People who absorb their blame. People who carry their burdens. People who explain away their behavior. Why? Because deep down, they know the entire illusion they've built would collapse without this support system. So, who do they look for? Ironically, they seek out the best of us. They're drawn to those with strong moral character, those who are kind, responsible, loyal, the ones who believe in second chances, the ones who take responsibility not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. It's a strange pattern when you think about it, isn't it? Why do bad people chase after good people? Why do manipulators always seem to find the kindest hearts? The answer is simple. Bad people need good people to survive. If you're someone with integrity, if you believe in fairness, if you try to see the best in others, then you are exactly the kind of person a manipulator wants by their side. Because you'll carry the blame. You'll make excuses for them. You'll pick up the broken pieces of their life and try to put them back together while they keep smashing everything in sight. Bad people often seek out the kindest, most compassionate individuals because they know you'll carry what they refuse to own. And here's how it plays out. You start making excuses for them. You say things like, maybe they had a tough childhood, or maybe they just need more time to grow. You rationalize the pain they've caused. You downplay the red flags. And while you're busy justifying their behavior, they continue using you as a shield barrier between themselves and the reality they refuse to face. Now, let's go even deeper. What kind of person do they become when they chronically refuse to take responsibility for their actions? The answer is one word: resentful. And resentment, make no mistake, is one of the most toxic emotional states a human being can live in. It doesn't just fester quietly, it grows, spreads, and corrupts everything it touches. When someone spends their entire life blaming others for their failures, they eventually start to believe the entire world is unfair. In their minds, everyone is out to get them. The system is rigged. People are obstacles. Life itself is an enemy. And once someone buys into that narrative, they begin to justify any behavior no matter how destructive. They manipulate not just to avoid blame, but to punish. They destroy relationships. They sabotage connections. They tear down anyone they believe is responsible for their pain. Why? Because they've convinced themselves that their victim sand, the world owes them something. And here's the tragedy. The more they reject responsibility, the worse their life becomes. Life is already difficult, even when you take full ownership of your actions. But when you refuse accountability, life doesn't just feel hard, it becomes unbearable. Every time you deflect blame, deny your mistakes, or push the burden onto someone else, you give away a piece of your power. You surrender control over your future. And I see this all the time in people locked into a victim mentality. They say things like, "I can't succeed because the system is stacked against me," or "I'm not happy because others keep dragging me down." But what they don't realize is that every time they speak those words, they reinforce their own helplessness. They're not just explaining their situation, they're training themselves to believe they have no agency, no authority, no power to change. And once you start believing that, once you convince yourself that you're not the main character in your own story, you stop living. You become a puppet reacting to life instead of shaping it. And here's the darker truth. Bad people want you to believe this. They want you to feel powerless. They want you to think it's all fate, luck, or someone else's fault, because the moment you take ownership of your life, you become untouchable. You stop playing their game. When you say, "I am responsible for where I am and I can change it," you reclaim every piece of power they tried to take. And when that happens, their manipulation loses its grip. So, how exactly do you protect yourself from people like this? How do you hold on to your power in a world full of blame shifters, manipulators, and victims in disguise? That's what we'll uncover in the next part. Are you ready to step into real freedom? So now, let's shift the focus to what you can do to stay grounded, sharp, and in control. First, pay close attention to patterns. Not words, not excuse patterns. If there's someone in your life who always has a reason why nothing is ever their fault, that's not bad luck. That's a glaring red flag. Think about it. If every time something goes wrong, they immediately point the finger elsewhere, never reflecting, never learning, you're looking at a person who will make you the villain the moment it benefits them. If you're not careful, if you let it slide too many times, you'll slowly become their scapegoat. And it doesn't always happen dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle little moments where they twist the facts just enough to make themselves look innocent and someone else look guilty. Over time, you may find yourself silently absorbing their blame without realizing it. Second, hold people accountable. Don't let them rewrite the past like it never happened. If you catch someone bending the truth, dodging responsibility, or painting themselves as the constant victim, recognize it for what it is. Even if you don't confront them out loud, acknowledge it in your own mind. Because if you don't, your perception begins to slip. Your grip on truth weakens. And once you start believing that, once you convince yourself that you're not the main character in your own story, you stop living. You become a puppet reacting to life instead of shaping it. And here's the darker truth. Bad people want you to believe this. They want you to feel powerless. They want you to think it's all fate, luck, or someone else's fault, because the moment you take ownership of your life, you become untouchable. You stop playing their game. When you say, "I am responsible for where I am and I can change it," you reclaim every piece of power they tried to take. And when that happens, their manipulation loses its grip. So, how exactly do you protect yourself from people like this? How do you hold on to your power in a world full of blame shifters, manipulators, and victims in disguise? That's what we'll uncover in the next part. Are you ready to step into real freedom? So now, let's shift the focus to what you can do to stay grounded, sharp, and in control. First, pay close attention to patterns. Not words, not excuse patterns. If there's someone in your life who always has a reason why nothing is ever their fault, that's not bad luck. That's a glaring red flag. Think about it. If every time something goes wrong, they immediately point the finger elsewhere, never reflecting, never learning you're looking at a person who will make you the villain the moment it benefits them. If you're not careful, if you let it slide too many times, you'll slowly become their scapegoat. And it doesn't always happen dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle little moments where they twist the facts just enough to make themselves look innocent and someone else look guilty. Over time, you may find yourself silently absorbing their blame without realizing it. Second, hold people accountable. Don't let them rewrite the past like it never happened. If you catch someone bending the truth, dodging responsibility, or painting themselves as the constant victim, recognize it for what it is. Even if you don't confront them out loud, acknowledge it in your own mind. Because if you don't, your perception begins to slip. Your grip on truth weakens. And that's when something even darker begins to take root. Resentment. Now, envy on its own is already toxic. Can eat away at a person's soul in private. But resentment? That's when envy turns into action. That's when a person doesn't just think, I wish I had what you have. They begin to believe, you don't deserve what you have. And if I can't have it, let's tie this back to what we've already talked about. Awareness, the ability to recognize the traits of destructive people before they gain a foothold in your life, is absolutely vital. And envy? Envy is one of those traits that can be incredibly corrosive if left unchecked. If you don't spot it early, it will slowly poison your relationships, your confidence, and your momentum. Like a subtle toxin, it seeps in unnoticed until the damage is done. We've already discussed manipulation and deception. So how does envy fit into that picture? Here's how. People who are envious of your success will rarely, if ever, admit it outright. Why? Because that would take honesty, and envy hides from honesty. Instead, they cloak their resentment in the disguise of concern, or advice that sounds supportive but secretly sows doubt. You've seen this before, haven't you? You share something exciting, a dream, a goal, a bold next step, and instead of getting support, you get subtle discouragement. That's a really competitive field. Are you sure you're cut out for that? Or, you know most people fail when they try that kind of thing. I just don't want to see you get hurt. It sounds caring on the surface, doesn't it? Like they're looking out for you. But take a closer look. Are they really trying to protect you, or are they trying to keep you small? Because when you rise, they feel threatened. When you stretch yourself, they see a mirror reflecting their own stagnation. And instead of climbing with you, they try to pull you back down, not in anger, but in subtle whispers meant to plant doubt right where your confidence is trying to grow. Now, you might try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't mean any harm. Maybe they're just being realistic. But here's the question you must ask yourself. Would they say the same thing to someone else? Would they react the same way if it were their own success at stake? Because the truth is, people who wrestle with envy follow a pattern. They don't discourage everyone. Only the ones they secretly see as competition. The ones whose growth threatens to expose their lack of it. And here's where it connects to something we've already explored. Accountability. Remember, destructive people never take ownership of their shortcomings. And when someone constantly avoids responsibility for their failures, where does that frustration go? It turns into envy. When you refuse to say, I need to work harder, or I made mistakes I need to learn from, you're left with only one place to look. At the people who are succeeding. The ones pushing forward. The ones evolving while you're standing still. But instead of reflecting inward, they lash outward. They think, it's not fair. They had better opportunities. They had more luck. They don't deserve it. And slowly, their envy morphs into resentment. Not because you did something wrong, but because your growth reminds them that they're still stuck. We saw how unchecked envy doesn't just stay hidden, it festers, mutates, and eventually finds its way into actions. And when it does, it's no longer just a feeling. It becomes sabotage. When resentment is left to simmer, it doesn't remain a private emotion. It spills into everyday interactions, into how they speak to you, how they treat you, how they show up or don't show up when you need support the most. That's the point where envy takes on a new form. Active sabotage. Sometimes it's subtle passive-aggressive remarks, a dismissive tone when you share good news, or a cold silence in moments where support would have meant the world. And sometimes, it's bold and direct whispers behind your back, spreading rumors, quietly discrediting your work, or trying to turn others against you. And here's the part that stings the most. If you're not careful, their envy can start to live inside you. If you allow their doubts to echo long enough, they begin to sound like your own thoughts. You start asking yourself, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't really deserve this. Maybe I should tone it down, not aim so high, not want so much. Don't let that happen, because that's exactly what they want. They want you to shrink so they don't have to feel the discomfort of their own stagnation. They want you to dim your light because your brightness makes their shadows too hard to ignore. If you stay small, they can stay comfortable. But what kind of life is that for you? Now, let's flip the mirror. Because here's the truth. This part might not be easy to hear, but it matters. Is there envy living inside you? Is there a quiet bitterness when you see someone else succeed? Do you ever find yourself thinking, why them and not me? Or quietly hoping someone else doesn't make it because their win feels like your loss? If so, you're not alone. But you are responsible for facing it. Because envy is a slow-burning poison. It doesn't explode, it erodes. It hollows you out from the inside. If you don't pull it up by the root, it won't just damage your relationships. It will devour your own joy, your confidence, your ability to grow. So what's the antidote? Learning. When you see someone succeed, resist the instinct to reason and choose curiosity instead. Instead of thinking, why them? Ask, what can I learn from their path? Instead of tearing them down, study their habits, their mindset, their work ethic. Let their momentum challenge you, not cripple you. Use their success as fuel, not as a reason to feel smaller. And here's another truth that might hurt before it heals. If you're constantly surrounded by people who resent success, who mock ambition, who tear down progress, you will eventually start to think like them. There is no neutral ground here. You either rise or you're dragged down. Spend too much time in the presence of envy, and you'll find yourself stuck in the same cycle. Self-doubt, playing small, and eventually sabotaging your own potential, all without even realizing it. We uncovered how envy, when left unchecked, doesn't just hurt others. It can trap you in cycles of self-doubt, guilt, and silence. But now, we shift the lens to something even more dangerous. The kind of person who wears no warning label, but leaves behind undeniable scars. Remember what I said earlier? Bad people rarely come with a sign that says danger. They often come as friends, partners, mentors, people who look supportive on the surface. But if you slow down, if you stay awake, if you truly pay attention, you'll begin to see patterns. You'll start to notice who genuinely celebrates your growth and who subtly withdraws when you rise. You'll start to recognize who roots for you in public and who quietly hopes you'll fail in private. And here's the thing, once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like your eyes adjust to the light and suddenly, everything becomes clear. You begin to see envy for what it truly is. Not a reflection of your worth, but a projection of their insecurity. And once you understand that, you take back the power. You stop chasing validation from people who never wanted to see you win. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never going to understand you anyway. And most importantly, you stop feeling guilty for growing past the people who chose to stay the same. Because at the end of the day, your success isn't about them, it's about you. It's about your calling. It's about how far you're willing to push yourself when no one's clapping. And if someone else can't handle that, that's not your burden to carry. But be careful. Don't let their resentment become your limitation. There's too much on the line. You have too much potential to spend your life trying to earn applause from people who secretly want you to stay small. Now let's be clear. I'm not talking about someone who occasionally struggles with perspective. We all do that. I'm talking about someone who, deep down, does not care how their actions affect others. Someone who, when you're suffering, doesn't flinch, or worse, sees it as an opportunity to step on your weakness. You need to recognize this. You need to see it for what it is. Because if you don't, you'll fall into a trap making excuses for their behavior, thinking, maybe I can fix them. Or worse, maybe I deserve this. And that's the most dangerous lie of all. Now, let's pull back and see the bigger picture again. Earlier, we talked about awareness being able to recognize the warning signs. Well, this is one of the clearest signs you can't afford to ignore. Because if you miss it, if you overlook someone's lack of empathy, you open the door to emotional chaos. People without empathy don't just hurt others by accident. They hurt with precision. They hurt with strategy. They hurt without remorse. And they do it in ways so subtle, you won't even realize what's happening until you've already been deeply affected. So how does this kind of harm take root? To answer that, we need to circle back to something we discussed earlier. The second key point: manipulation and deception. Let's break this down. A person who lacks empathy is often a master manipulator. Why? Because they don't feel the moral weight that you do. They don't feel guilt. They don't feel shame. They don't feel that internal sting that makes a decent person pause and say, "Wait, I hurt someone." If they lie to you and you catch them, they don't flinch. They don't apologize. They don't feel bad. And that's not just a personality quirk. That's a fundamentally different psychological framework. It means they don't just twist reality to cover their tracks, they twist it to control you. Have you ever had someone make you doubt your own emotions? Your own reactions? You try to speak up. You say something honest like, "Hey, what you did really hurt me," and they stare back at you like you're the problem for even feeling that way. Like you've somehow made a mistake just by speaking the truth. That's not confusion. That's a tactic. A deliberate move designed to make sure you never stand up for yourself again. Because the moment you begin to question your emotions, your instincts, your perception of what's real you become easier to control. And here's the chilling truth. If they can control your emotions, they can control your actions. They don't have to chain you physically, they just have to tangle your thoughts enough that you start to obey without even realizing it. Now, let's shift to the third key point: lack of accountability. Why do these people refuse to take responsibility for their actions? Think about it. If you don't feel empathy, if you don't care how your actions affect others, if someone tells you, "You hurt me," and you feel absolutely nothing inside, then why on earth would you ever feel the need to take responsibility? The answer is, you wouldn't. Instead, you shift the blame. You say things like, "You're just too sensitive. That's not what I meant. Why do you always overreact?" Sound familiar? It's a pattern. One designed to deflect, dismiss, and ultimately devalue your voice. But here's why it's so dangerous. Accountability is what allows people to grow. If you can't admit when you're wrong, you can't change. And if you never change, you don't just stay stuck. You slide deeper and deeper into bitterness, pride, and in many cases, something darker. You descend into a state where envy and resentment take root, which brings us to the fourth key point: envy and resentment. Why do people who lack empathy often carry such deep resentment? Because when you don't take responsibility for your own life, you only have one option left. Blame everyone else. Your failures? Not your fault. Your pain? Someone else caused it. Your lack of progress? Must be because someone else had it easier. And that kind of thinking? It doesn't lead to healing. It leads to hate. It doesn't make you stronger. It makes you bitter. And that bitterness, when left unchallenged, becomes fuel for manipulation, destruction, and cycles that repeat over and over again.